for Peace webinar. The International Media Association for Peace recognizes the vital role that journalists play in guarding against totalitarianism and supporting the expansion of freedom. IMAP represents a worldwide professional network of journalists who support a socially responsible and moral media to convey accurate content, address the challenges of our time based on the highest principles of ethical journalism, and understanding that universal values are key elements in a world of peace. Our topic today is new religions, cult experts, and the media. For nearly half a century, tensions have existed between new religious movements and what is referred to as the anti-cult movement. Still today, the anti-cult movement's negative portrayal of new religious movements has been largely embraced and reinforced by the media. Though new religious movements have sought acceptance into the mainstream, they are often portrayed by the media as cults. Today, we're going to look into the background of the media's negative portrayal of new religious movements and the role that so-called cult experts have played in the acceptance or lack of acceptance of new religious movements. Our speakers today are Dr. Thomas Ward, Provost and Professor of Peace and Development Studies at HJI International Graduate School for Peace and Public Leadership. Professor Joel J. Campbell, Associate Teaching Professor at BYU School of Communications. Our moderator today is Ray Lipowcan. Ray Lipowcan is currently employed with Independence Professionals, an agency assisting adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities such as autism and Down syndrome. He is a producer at Pittsburgh Community Television, Pittsburgh's public access television station, where he produces shows of local interest as well as promoting the national and international activities of the Universal Peace Federation. You can view those shows on his YouTube channel. To find it, just search on YouTube with his name. He is also a blue and gold officer with the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. This is a position recruiting high school students in the Pittsburgh area for appointment as midshipmen to the United States Naval Academy. Ray also serves as a Universal Peace Coordinator for Western Pennsylvania. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you, Pierre. And Pierre is actually the IMAP Executive Director for Canada, and he's joining us today from Montreal. So it's nice to have an international team working today and to be partnering with Canada on this program. Pierre has actually helped for many years with the IMAP program, sort of more behind the scenes, creating and developing our webinar. So Pierre, it's nice to see you in front of the camera today.
Thank you.
So yes, as Pierre said, we're IMAP, the International Media Association for Peace, and with the rapid development of technology over the last decade or two, media has really become so very prominent in our lives. And 100 years ago, perhaps it was just newspapers and then radio, then television. But now with the computer age, there are so many platforms for people to get their information. And in order to make informed decisions, we need really reliable sources of information. And if you're like me, you're probably asking the question a lot, who can I trust and where can I find those reliable sources of information? So many times it's just becoming so difficult to understand what is true and what is reliable. So this is probably more so in the political world than anything else that we see. And with the election cycle coming up here in the United States, we're getting so much information, and it's really hard to understand what is true and what is not true. And this is also valid as well in the religious world. And that's what we're going to be looking at today is particularly new religious movements and how they have been portrayed by the media over the last several decades. And today with us, we have two scholars who have been involved for many years in academia, studying and teaching the relationship between religion and media. First, Dr. Ward will give a presentation, and then following Dr. Ward, Professor Joel Campbell will give commentary and perhaps some questions as well. We can have a lively discussion as well following his presentation. So Dr. Ward is Provost and Professor of Peace and Development Studies at HJI Graduate School for Peace and Public Leadership. He holds degrees from the University of Notre Dame, the University of Paris-Sorbonne, HJI Graduate School for Peace and Public Leadership, and he did his doctoral studies at Catholic Institute of Paris and at De La Salle University in the Philippines. From 1993 until 2019, he taught at the University of Bridgeport and served for 18 years as Dean of the University of Bridgeport's College of Public and International Affairs, and was named Distinguished Dean Emeritus at completion of his tenure there. Dr. Ward has lived and worked in the United States, Europe, Latin America, and East Asia, and has authored, co-authored, or edited more than 10 books, including March to Moscow, The Role of Reverend Sun Myung Moon and the Collapse of Communism, The Political Economy of NGOs, and Park Statue Politics, Comfort Women Memorials in the United States. And he's been a contributor to the Washington Times, the International Journal of World Peace, the East Asia Journal, the Journal of Living Together, the Asia Pacific Journal with the Japan focus. He's been a Fulbright Scholar in France and also a visiting foreign ministry scholar at the Institute of Modern History in Taipei. Welcome, Dr. Ward.
Thank you very much, Ray. It's good to see you, my fellow Pittsburgher. I'm lucky enough to have a chance to see Ray periodically in person because both of us are from Pittsburgh. And though I now live in New York, I always love to visit there. And actually was last there, I guess it was just back in May. So anyway, it's good to see you today, Ray. And welcome to everyone who's taken the time to join us today. You know, I first really became aware of the press bias when I began to study about the way in which the press dealt with so many of the regimes that eventually fell into communism. And I discovered over and over again that there was this tendency on the part of the press to maybe see something in a very short-sighted way and fail and attack an existing regime, failing to understand what the consequences of that would be for that country if it did fall into communism. And we all know the story of the types of things that transpired as a consequence. And at some point, I became likewise interested in the study of the press and in the way in which the press deals with new religions, and particularly with my own religion, which is the Unification Church. I was very, very impacted when I saw the way in which things had been handled. So I'd like to maybe share some slides and walk through this with you together, a brief presentation with some of my observations, if you will. Okay, so this is a slightly adapted title, but it's the media, slur words, cult experts, gatekeeping and agenda setting, obstacles to religious freedom. And okay, so new religious movements or religions which had come to the United States and become significant presences there in the particularly the 19th century. They all went through a certain amount of marginalization, whether we speak of Catholics or Jews, or likewise later on Muslims, and certainly members of the Church of Latter-day Saints. We're very fortunate to have Professor Campbell with us here. That they were marginalized. They were oftentimes resentment towards the faiths and misunderstanding towards those faiths had their roots in the ways in which the media reported about them, and they led to horrible things, including, as we know, the deaths of the founding leaders of the Latter-day Saints, including Joseph Smith. And my focus today is not those earlier marginalizations which transpired, I'm going to speak more particularly on some of the developments which have occurred over the past 60 years or so. But I do want to point out that among these religions, particularly Mormons and Catholics both, have been accused of being cultish in some ways. There's a book that's entitled Catholic Cults, written by a Canadian Mr. Beauregard. His name was Andre McNichol. And he looks at within Roman Catholicism some of the various movements within Roman Catholicism, including Opus Dei, Marriage Encounter, Knights of Columbus, and suggests that these different subsets within Roman Catholicism have a certain dimension of cultism to them. And likewise, within Judaism, in his most recent book, The Cult of Trump, Stephen Hassan points to certain groups within Judaism, which he likewise identifies as being cult-like. And in the case of the Church of Latter-day Saints, we know that back during the 2012 election, there was an effort on the part of some media outlets to suggest that somehow Mormonism was also cultish, if you will. But as I said, my focus here will be particularly that particular line of thought, those who tend to look at religions through the perspective of the anti-cult movement. So to some extent, even other religions have been affected by that particular way of seeing things. Certainly, it's also true for Islam. Likewise, there are cases within Islam that we could point to as well. But mostly, it has been focused not upon these larger faiths, but upon newer religious movements. Now, the Code of Ethics of the Society of Professional Journalists, it has some admirable dimensions to it. I've just picked a few of them. There's not supposed to be any kind of stereotyping based upon race or religion or ethnicity, sexual orientation, physical appearance. Also, the media is called upon to support the open exchange of views, even if they find some of those views to be repugnant. And the media is reminded of its responsibility to give voice to the voiceless, and to always think about the importance of minimizing harm, reflecting upon those who might be adversely affected or persecuted because of adverse news coverage. And really an emphasis that pursuit of the news is not a license for arrogance. And we know that the temptation is always there within the media. You want to make a name for yourself. You want to become an expert in your field. You want people to recognize. You want to win a Pulitzer, finally. And all of those things are driving forces, which can somehow cause some to sidestep these various key dimensions, if you will, of journalist ethics. And I think that we can point out, I'm not going to go through these one by one, but I hope that through my presentation, it will become evident that the press has been guilty on a number of occasions of somehow violating the code of ethics of professional journalists in their coverage of new religions. Media, it's a truism, but media is so extremely powerful. And any interest group, any cause which exists, if it really has the ability to attract the interest, the attention, and the compassion of the media, then the way is open for it to actually dramatically change society from the viewpoint of political parties, legislative branches, the executive branch of government, judiciary, all the way through. Martin Luther King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference, his Montgomery bus boycott movement, they were interest groups. And over a period of time, somehow the media began to pay attention and see the nobility of the cause of these people, and likewise to recognize the correctness of the cause. And over time, as the media told that story, we know that it had a huge impact upon America's primary political parties. It resulted in the Civil Rights Act of 1963. It resulted in executive actions such as the desegregation of the Little Rock school system. It contributed without any doubt to the 1950s Brown versus Board of Education decision, which opened the way to integration of schools. So the media can foster change in a positive way, but they can also foster an atmosphere of animosity and hysteria towards new religions. And I'm just going to give a few examples of that. One of the ways is through language itself. We know that the language that the media decides to use in reporting on new religious movements can have a significant impact. For example, instead of referring to some religions as religions, the media often refers to them as cults. And Gordon Melton, who has dedicated his life to the study of new religions, says, my working definition of a cult is a group that you don't like. And I say that somewhat facetiously, but at the same time, in fact, that is my working definition of a cult. It is a group that somebody doesn't like. It is a derogatory term, and I have never seen it redeemed from the derogatory connotations that it picked up in the sociological literature of the 1930s. Now, this is an area which kind of points to the hypocrisy of the press, because the press typically respects racial, ethnic, and other societal minorities, referring to them respectfully in the ways that the minorities refer to themselves, the way that they wish to be referred to. For example, but it violates this principle when it uses the term cult in the case of new religions. In a review of Newspapers and Publishers Extra, which is a very, very large database which you can subscribe to. It does not include the New York Times, but it includes the Chicago Tribune, it includes the Los Angeles Times, it includes the San Francisco Chronicle, and so many other publications. And when I did a review there, I found that the term cult was used 3.6 million times. Whereas in the case of new religions, they only opted to use that term 120,000 times. So it means that, particularly in this database, which does include many of our mainstream newspapers, for every one time that these media use the term new religion, they use the term cult 30 times. So it's a dehumanizing term. It's a dehumanizing term. And just by using it already, you create an image of people dancing around a fire, somehow drinking blood. It creates a very, very strange image. You can say, no, this is a clinical term. It only means this, and this. But we know the reality is not that. We know the impact of use of that term. The press refers to Hispanics or Latinos. It doesn't call them Spanish. Latinos or Hispanics considered disrespectful to be referred to in that way, and they're right about that. They should be referred to as they wish to be referred to. Homosexuals, they prefer to be referred to as gays, and they likewise should be respected. That's how they wish to be referred to, and they should be referred to as per their wishes. But in the case of the new religious movements, the media does not do so. It gives a whole series of reasons of why it's appropriate to do that. Likewise, in the case of Unification Church, even though unificationists prefer to be called unificationists, they love to use the M term, which is again a demeaning term, and suggests something which I feel does not portray what is portrayed through the word unificationist. Within media theory, and I think Professor Campbell knows more about this than I do, There are certain types of theories which exist. One is referred to as agenda setting, and another is referred to as gatekeeping. And agenda setting, what it means, and according to the Encyclopedia of Communication Theory, is it represents the ways that the media and other institutions prime and frame issues and events for their audiences, and therefore influence and shape public opinion, either intentionally or unintentionally. So even just using the word cult, that shapes things a certain way, if you will. And furthermore, by seeing an issue covered in the news media and seeing it covered repeatedly and with great emphasis, we come to share with the media the view that the issue has legitimacy. And thus we begin to also make it a priority on our own personal agendas. So that's one of the things that, communication theorists recognize that media has the power to do. It helps the general public to set its agendas and determine what is and what is not important. Furthermore, there is what's called media gatekeeping, and we're all very aware of this. And media gatekeeping means that the media has the ability to determine which stories to include and which stories to exclude from a given day's newspaper or broadcast, and what to emphasize within those stories and what not to emphasize. They thereby frame the issues covered in their publications and programming by choosing what to cover. And here in the United States, we live this out on a daily basis. If we look at certain media outlets that have very clear political agendas, let's say MSNBC versus Fox News. MSNBC, every day it's going to be about Trump and January 6th. And every day Fox News is going to be about Hunter Biden. They have agendas, and they push those agendas. They're gatekeepers. They want to get those things out into the general public, and for the public to pay heed to their messaging. Now, another way in which the media falters is in its false attribution of authority to people that have no right to be referred to as authorities. So-called cult experts, the kinds of people that the media repeatedly refers to as so-and-so is a cult expert. Let's compare, first of all, what is usually understood by a religious scholar. I want to give probably one of the best examples of the 20th and 21st century. I'm speaking about Houston Smith, who taught for many years at Syracuse University, also taught prior to that at MIT and several other distinguished institutions of higher education in the United States. Houston Smith spent the very first 17 years of his life in China, and his first language was Mandarin. He earned his PhD in religion and philosophy at the University of Chicago. He dedicated 10 years of his life to the study and practice of Vedanta, one of the six principal schools of Hinduism. He dedicated 10 years of his life to the study and practice of Zen Buddhism. He dedicated 10 years of his life to the study and practice of Sufism, which is a mystic tradition within Islam, which those who are seminary educated, you're well aware of Sufism. And for years, he studied, participated in, and actively supported Native American religions and rituals, and was solidly behind them. And by the way, he also met and conferred with the Reverend Moon, co-founder of Unification Church. He delivered lectures at UTS. He participated in religious youth services, an ecumenical movement founded within the Unification Church community. He participated in the Academic God Conference and in the Interreligious Federation for World Peace for over a period of more than 10 years. He had all different types of activities. Yet, in spite of all these different types of exposure, he had the ability to be objective about the different faiths and at the same time keep his own faith, because until the very end of his life, he was a Christian. So there are experts, but in terms of the anti-cult movement and in terms of the ones who are often portrayed as experts by the media in terms of assessing new religious movements, we have what are called overnight experts. They're not really scholars. All of them, more or less, they follow the same pattern. These are people that, for one reason or another, they came to have animosity towards one new religion or another. And they learned more about it from the anti-cult movement. And what the anti-cult movement provides is not a scientific study of religion. They provide a narrative and through that narrative, they learned to judge new religions based on purely psychological criteria. And at the same time, they chose to continue, in most cases, to give the benefit of the doubt to powerful mainstream churches and religions, which, by the way, deserve the benefit of the doubt, but so do new religions. They tend to treat all new religions and their wrongdoings as one religion. If there's a fault in one, they will predict the same wrongdoing within another as well. A few days ago, I had a chance to speak, and I cited the case of Rabbi Morris Davis, who spoke about Jonestown and compared Jim Jones to the Unification Church and said, the path of the cults leads to Jonestown. That was his message, which he said in front of the U.S. Congress. Well, 40 some years later, I see no evidence of that, and just totally absurd to take things in and associate what happened in one religion to another. And by the way, those of you who've studied about Jim Jones, you might know he was not a believer in God. He was a Leninist. He was a strong believer in Vladimir Lenin. He believed that communism was the way to effect change. He didn't want to go to Guyana. He wanted to take his community to the Soviet Union because he had a lot of hope and aspiration for the Soviet Union. And he referred to the suicidal act, which took the lives of 900 people. They didn't all commit suicide. Some of them we know were actually shot. But that action was referred to by Jim Jones as a revolutionary act. You can understand Jim Jones much better if you study Marxism than if you were to study religion, any religion per se. And the critics, they tend to treat what would be seen as the exception in one religion as the rule for new religions. For example, we're willing to not say, oh, this is the rule if certain types of wrongdoings are committed in certain religions. We see it as an exception, and that's the right way for it to be. But in the case of new religions, so often it's the rules. Someone gets upset with their parents, and then the thing is, oh, these people, they teach the members of their church to hate their parents, So then they tend to develop a narrative on how they became experts on the cults, and they learn to use all the demeaning language when referring to the new religions. These are some of the traits of so-called anti-cult experts. So while clear standards exist for someone like a Houston Smith, the media does not abide by those standards when they speak about cult experts. If you can imagine, the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, the San Francisco Examiner, the Arizona Republic number among the many American religions who refer to the gentleman you see here by the name of Rick Ross as a cult expert. Rick Ross has a high school degree. Ted Patrick, who started the anti-cult movement, had a 10th grade degree. And what's the consequence of false attribution of authority? Well, one of the examples is the case of the Falun Gong in China. Both Rick Ross and Steve Hassan both have referred to the Falun Gong as a cult. As a matter of fact, until very recently, Rick Ross was very much involved with the Center for the Study of Destructive Cults in China, which this is a center in the People's Republic of China studying new religions, and he's been involved with that. And his book, Cults Inside Out, begins by paying particular tribute to two former members of the Falun Gong who were involved in a protest, actually a self-immolation, which was condemned by the Falun Gong. But Rick Ross uses this as an example to show how this cult is violent, is misdirected, and therefore must be really recognized as a danger. And in May, Steve Hassan, speaking about the Epoch Times, which I guess have some connection with the Falun Gong, he says Epoch Times equals Falun Gong Chinese cults. Some of you may have heard of the stories about forced organ harvesting of members of the Falun Gong movement in China. And even the United Nations Human Rights the council has expressed alarm by the allegations of organ harvesting by inside the People's Republic of China. And people like Rick Ross, does he really want to call out the Falun Gong and say nothing about China? In China, there's no Google, there's no Facebook, there's no YouTube, there's no Wikipedia, there's no Zoom, there's no WhatsApp, there's no Netflix, no Vimeo, no Pinterest, no New York Times, no Washington Times, no BBC, even no SlideShare, no Washington Post, no ABC, NBC, Huffington Post, no Voice of America, none of those things. And somehow the biggest thing is to call out the Falun Gong and allow the Chinese then to use your materials to be able to marginalize a religious group. Rick Ross justifies his expertise without any study based upon the fact that he's been called as an expert witness on cults in some state courts as well as in the federal court system. But this is a little bit like the experts of the past who were called out to testify in favor of segregation in the Deep South. Are they still seen as experts today? I think the time will come that people like Rick Ross will be in that same category. On May 7th, 1993, I wrote an editorial that appeared in the Poughkeepsie Journal. And in it, I spoke about the Waco tragedy. And I mentioned there the pivotal role that Rick Ross had played in that. And I spoke about the tie-in between what happened at Waco, the way the FBI dealt with the Branch Davidians, and deprogramming. According to snapping, and snapping, it's written by, again, people who are not experts. They don't have terminal degrees in psychiatry or in religion or anything else. They were basically people that traveled around the country and wrote. Smart people, but they were not trained in the area. And they talked about the conversion to new religions. And they said that there were key dimensions to it, such as depriving inductees of food, depriving them of sleep, subjecting them to an information overload with prayer, singing, long repetitive lectures that would eventually cause them to snap through quote, this is their term, an infinitely complex convergence of physical, mental, and emotional stresses that, quote, crest in a holographic crisis in the brain, then resolve into a whole new organization of mind and personality. This is a narrative. It's not scientific. They have no basis to make this kind of observation. But anyway, that's how they chose to depict this. If we look at the testimony of the FBI figures who were in charge of Waco, we find that they did precisely the same things as are described in snapping as the process to convert someone and likewise to unconvert someone. They tried to deprive David Koresh and his followers of food, supplies, and sleep. They exposed them repeatedly all night to flashing lights, blaring Tibetan chants, and music and squealing of squealing rabbits. They wanted to persuade, this is their term, David Koresh's followers that their leader was a thief, a liar, a child molester, and a profanity-spouting con man. Exactly the same type of ad hominem attacks which exist within deprogramming. And the FBI agent in charge, if you can believe it, he said that he wanted to reverse Koresh's followers' mindset and give them, quote, a chance to think for themselves. You see the subset of this book by Steve, empowering people to think for themselves. This was also a term that was repeatedly used by Ted Patrick, who started the whole deprogramming anti-cult movement. There was concern after Waco about the way in which people had been mistreated, about the way in which the whole event had been handled, and whether it was really necessary for it to result in the kind of tragedy that it resulted at the end. And Professor Nancy Hammerman, who was at that time a professor of sociology of religion at Boston University, was called upon to lead an investigation of the federal government's mishandling of Waco. And she pointed to the FBI and to the events there And what she said, Mr. Rick Ross was closely involved with both the ATF and the FBI. Ross clearly had the most extensive access to both agencies of any person on the cult expert list. Ross was listened to more attentively. Ammerman learned that Ross recommended that agents attempt to publicly humiliate Koresh, hoping to drive a wedge between him and his followers. And this was actually done. Ammerman notes that those embarrassment tactics were indeed tried. And furthermore, it's pointed out that Steve Hassan, what he emphasized to the agents was that they should never speak when they spoke in their announcements about David Koresh using his name. Instead, they should use his given name of Vernon. What did that help? What purpose did that serve? Philip Arnold, who is a religious scholar at the Reunion Institute, which is located in Texas, and was one of the key mediators on the religious side, who was trying to bring Koresh and his followers out safely, and he believed he was making progress in that area, and was stunned when a decision was suddenly made to go in and to launch the intervention, which transpired and took so many lives. He emphasized that his voice was not listened to properly, and I was fortunate enough. He read my article when he asked to come and meet me, and we met in New York. I was happy to have a conversation with Philip Arnold back there at that time, and he was just filled with so much regret because he felt that what happened, it definitely did not have to happen. And both he and James Tabor of the University of North Carolina had worked very hard in order to try to emphasize the role that intelligent dialogue could have played in somehow reversing that situation and avoiding the tragedy that resulted. Massimo Introvigne, whom some of you may be aware of, and who is the president of CESNOR, which is the Center for the Study of New Religions, which is located in Italy, has made a very important observation about the way in which these cult experts approach new religions. As he puts it quite simply, when you assess any religion based on purely psychological criteria, you open the way to assessing all religions based on purely psychological criteria. And that's already what has happened through books such as Andre McNichol's Catholic Cults. So to come to conclusion, this nation was a nation founded on profound religious roots. And even some of the most significant social developments, such as Dr. Martin Luther King's civil rights movement, had religion at the very heart and soul of it and appealed to that dimension of Americans. It was in 1962, in Engel versus Vitale, that school prayer ended in the United States. We know that the Ten Commandments have been removed from so many public places over the years since then as well. We know that there have been education programs inside of public schools against so-called new religious movements, the so-called cults. And at the same time, condoms are freely distributed in those same public schools without parents knowing about it. And likewise, abortions are conducted through the help of those schools without the parents ever knowing about it. And likewise, today, there's a tremendous gender confusion going on with young boys using the women's room, the women's locker room, and vice versa. This type of confusion has transpired. Franklin D. Roosevelt was a visionary when he said, "Where freedom of religion has been attacked, the attack has come from sources opposed to democracy. Where democracy has been overthrown, the spirit of free worship has disappeared. And where religion and democracy have vanished, good faith and reason in international affairs have given way to strident ambition and brute force." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ward. That was a very in-depth and thorough explanation, and you definitely showed your passion for this topic. So I think we all picked up on that. Thank you. And I'm happy that you showed both the positive and negative examples of the power and influence of the media on our lives. So thank you for that. At this time, I'd like to welcome up Professor Campbell. Professor Campbell is an associate professor in Brigham Young University's School of Communications since 2002. He holds a master's degree from Ohio State University and he teaches communication studies and journalism courses. He actively researches media and religion, media ethics, and law and freedom of information issues. His publications include Mitt Romney's Religion, a 5-factor model for analysis of media representation of Mormon identity, Artemis Ward, The Forgotten Influence of the Genial Showman's Mormon Lecture on Public Opinion of Mormons in the United States and Great Britain, and Baptism of Fire, a comparative analysis of media coverage of the LDS Church's practice of proxy baptisms. Welcome, Professor Campbell.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
I'm going to share my screen and hopefully that, can you see that screen now? Let's see.
Yes, it came up.
Great. Okay. Well, I welcome all those from around the country, and I love talking with my unification friends. I served my Latter-day Saint mission in Korea and met many fine unification people there. So Tom, Dr. Ward, annyeonghaseyo. So I just wanted just some responses. These are kind of random responses, but I want to call, first of all, kind of a contemporary issue for us as Latter-day Saints. In 2018, the man we regard as president and prophet of our church, Russell M. Nelson, asked the world to stop calling us Mormons, and even changed the Mormon.org website. And it's no longer the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, but the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square. At that point, the Associated Press actually changed its style book, but has since backtracked. They originally changed the style book to refer to the name of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And but now they a lot of journalists say, well, you know, Mormons must not is widely understood, and it really doesn't fit in the lead paragraph of a story or the headline. So I guess the middle ground that's come about is that a lot of journalists will use the full name of the church and maybe the second or third paragraph, but often use Mormon throughout. A friend of mine did a study recently showing who's adopted the change in the most of the Utah media has adopted the change, but across the world, the actually coverage that's critical or mocking continues to use the term Mormon. So the M word that you have is also similar to our M word. And I really agree with you about the selection of questionable sources. My paper that was mentioned about the media coverage of the Mitt Romney campaign, this is not just Mitt Romney, but I think we're starting to see it now with the DeSantis campaign. I'm not saying I'm supporting any candidate, but already Ron DeSantis is being attacked over faith. And who are the sources they're using? They're not religion sources, it's political sources. And that's what happened here. We had, I don't want to disparage some of my Baptist friends, but there are some Baptists that don't like Latter-day Saints. And that became the source rather than talking to believers. It was talking to political opponents, and unfortunately, political reporters aren't as sophisticated as many of our good religion reporters we have in the United States. So the biggest thing I think is just talk to believers. During that campaign, you mentioned Society of Professional Journalists. I'm a proud member of that, have been since college. I wrote a column in their magazine called Quill, and I said, instead of going to people who don't understand my faith or people who think they understand my faith, why don't you go to church? Here's how you can go to church. Go talk to the believers. That's how you should cover a campaign about Mitt Romney. We're also not free from the David Koresh syndrome. As a young reporter in 1988, there was a standoff of a break-off polygamous group in Marion, Utah. I was there, and they also used the same tactics that you talked about with David Koresh. It was the middle of winter. They'd rented a motorhome for us to stay in, but he couldn't sleep all night because of the whining, the sounds and all this sort of thing. They used the exact same kind of things. So I was exposed to the same things they did in Koresh up in Marion, Utah, which again ended in a shootout, and a police officer was shot. Falun Gong, our version in the Latter-day Saints, is called The Banner of Heaven by John Krakauer. A popular book, recently became a cable series. And John Krakauer's basic premise is that violence and violent tendencies are part of the DNA of Latter-day Saints, no matter what, which to me is totally ludicrous, but became part of this, even more so than the book, part of the cable series that's been popular, and a lot of stereotyping, a lot of things like that. So I think we're in the same area when we talk about the abuse of the media. And I'm a journalist. I practiced journalism for 20 years. And I will say that we have Latter-day Saints have been victims. So this idea of marginalized faith get different treatments than perhaps mainstream faiths. I totally agree with that. I think that there is a hunger among journalists to somehow sensationalize, or like you say, make a name for themselves by covering marginalized faiths in a way that's different than we would cover mainstream and Roman Catholicism perhaps now, or mainstream Baptists or Lutherans, but even many of those groups, the Baptists were kind of an outlaw gang in the early founding of the United States, and found haven up in that radical place called Rhode Island with Roger Williams, excuse me. And so there was religious freedom in our country has started out with this bias. So to me, one of the key things that I think Dr. Ward would agree with is that journalists should allow people of that faith to self-identify, to tell their own story. I mentioned the Mitt Romney campaign coverage. I just wanted to add a couple things. While we're talking about the last maybe half century, this idea of bias is not a new thing in the American landscape. In the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, just a fun couple anecdotes. The Saints had gathered to Utah, and there was editorials almost daily in the New York press about what we're going to do about the Mormons. I'll use the term, but one of the ideas was, let's distribute Bibles. We'll take a trainload of Bibles out and distribute Bibles. One of the elders of the church said, "Sure, we need more Bibles. Bring them on." The Protestant missionaries, probably the earlier form of deprogrammers of the day, set up small churches. There's one not far from me here where I live that's still in existence, hasn't grown much. Protestant missionary work was, and also Latter-day Saints were the target of immigration rules in both the United States and in Great Britain. Thankfully, a man named Winston Churchill was wise enough to not allow the immigration rules to be put intact for immigration from Great Britain. I have been want to talk about agenda setting and gatekeeping, certainly very important concepts that we study in communication. Although I would probably say agenda setting and gatekeeping is not as strong as it once was because of new media, social media. There's certainly ways now, and so maybe that agenda setting and I would say gatekeeping probably not really much at all, although you're right. CNN, MSNBC, Fox do have agenda setting power, and they still do that. And I think the sources, you're spot on when you say that there needs to be use of academic and interfaith sources to talk about what people believe and how they believe it. I wanted to share this because I thought it was enlightening. It's something I found in 1844 in the New York Herald. Editor was a famous editor of the time, James Gordon Bennett. This was after the martyrdom of the prophet Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram. This is what he wrote in his newspaper, and I think it applies to us today. There can be no doubt that political feeling entered largely into the popular excitement in that region against the Mormons. He noted that the Whig Party worried LDS church members would support their rival, Democratic candidate James K. Polk, in that year's presidential election. In turn, the party's newspaper in Illinois had created much of the anti-Mormon sentiment that led to the assassination of the leader and his brother. This is his quote, which I think bears fruit today. "This affords another and most melancholy illustration of the pernicious, demoralizing, brutalizing influence of the party presses, which are daily influencing the passions of the people by the vilest and most incendiary tirades against their respective opponents." And unfortunately, in an era when we're seeking for religious understanding and dignity, I see those kinds of vile and incendiary tirades also taking place in the media of today. Maybe, well, Pulitzer had his problems. I think that this is still the goal for good journalists, and maybe we can say that. What is everybody's business is nobody's business except the journalists. It is his by adoption, but for his care, almost every reform which would fall stillborn, he holds officials to their duty. He exposes secret schemes of plunder. He promotes every hopeful plan of progress. Without him, public opinion would be shapeless and numb. He brings all classes, all professions together and teaches them to act in concert of the basis of their common citizenship. And I think, Dr. Ward, you're absolutely correct in saying that journalists fall short when it comes to reporting about religion in this area. And so just a thought there. So this is one of my favorite, there's a new book by the title of this. It's called Krister Stendhal's The Rule of Religious Understanding. The book's name is Holy Envy, but these are the 3 rules which I like to apply now to religion reporting as well as religious understanding. First, when trying to understand another religion, you should ask the adherents of that religion and not its enemies. That would be the programmers or the anti-Mormons or whoever it might be. Don't compare your best to their worst. So every faith may have warts or might have things that people might consider, odd or whatever. And then also leave for holy envy. When did this happen? This statement happened when the Latter-day Saints were trying to build a temple in Oslo, and Krister Stendhal was the bishop of Sweden, and he held a press conference. This is where Dr. Ward, I might say, I think I want to introduce an interfaith element to this. I think we can defend each other. And that is that he stood up as the bishop of the Lutheran bishop and said, he announced these 3 rules. And then he said something interesting. Latter-day Saints believe in posthumous baptism or baptism for the dead, where you can do a ritual for deceased ancestors. And he says, I have holy envy for that fact. And I could see myself doing that. So I think and I take my students of world religions, we have a media and world religion class, and I ask them to always have holy envy and to compare our best to their best when we go to these things. I think there's also, through interfaith alliance, along with the things you mentioned, we can also build some ground. I'm not sure what my time is here. What are we looking like? I do have some other things I'd like to share, but I don't. Ray, what's our time like?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so the ethics question. So I really like this idea of asking adherents what they believe. One of my colleagues in the what we call the journalism and mass communication academic area in religion and media, his name is Joe Grimm. He was a former reporter at the Detroit Free Press. He has a project every semester, and he asks 100 questions about different faiths, Islam, Latter-day Saints, Catholicism, whatever it might be. And then he asks people like me to help answer the questions. And these have been wonderful. I realize this is like a great approach. They're not very expensive, by the way. You can buy his guides on Amazon, but this is a great application of the SPJ Code of Ethics, and Joe Grimm has been part of the ethics group at SPJ. So let's develop objective answers to questions about different faiths. I'm just using my own because I know about it, but I know that there's others here. And then now, Dr. Ward, you may not agree totally. This is the Religion News Writers Association, Religion News Association. This is out of the religion style book about cults. So I like the first part of it. We might not all agree on the last part of it. It says cult, a term that has come to be associated with religious groups from outside the mainstream that have overly controlling leadership or dangerous practices. For that reason, journalists should use it with greatest care and only when they are certain it fits. Now, they say that it does fit People's Temple, Heaven's Gate, Branch Davidians. We might disagree on that, and maybe we should have a dialogue with the Religion News Association. But anyway, I think the point you made that the recovery, that the FBI and the those reporting on it didn't go to religion experts to really understand what the Branch Davidians believed and what was going on there. So I'm just going to hit these really quickly. The 7 sins of religion reporting, and then I'll tie it up. So I think instead of the word cult, probably one of the things that's appeared more and more in religion reporting today is fundamentalist. That's almost become a bad word, or in certain ways. And so be careful about using the term fundamentalist unless the religious group uses it. Deadly sin, so don't use simplistic labels like Orthodox Mormons or fundamentalists or whatever. Labels don't help. Instead, go talk to the people and have them explain what they believe rather than try to attach a stereotyping label. Assume that religion equals politics. Unfortunately, I see so much work today that shows that if you say Republicans believe this, you know, Republicanism is equated with conservative religion in some way. Treat religious doctrines as their opinions. And so this is one thing that really hurts me. It sticks in my craw, is that, you know, if you have a religious belief that you deeply believe in, journalists often mock it or take it for granted. We have a newspaper here in town in Salt Lake that the governor asked everybody to pray for rain. And boy, did we get rain and snow this year. We had record levels of snow in the mountains. He asked us to thank God again for the snow and to pray for more rain for next year. And the local newspaper, you know, mocked him. As if, you know, was this guy's crazy? Well, why not have religious dialogue about prayer in our public spaces? Be lazy. Always settle for a quote or two from someone with an authority. This goes right to the heart of your, you know, the guys that have these authoritative titles. They've made themselves, they're activists for or against something, and instead go talk to real people who really understand a faith. Go talk to an academic inside the faith or outside the faith. And those would be great. Focus on the Lord side of religion. That's one. Number 6, always focus on the big things and ignore the small. Religion's part of everyday life, and I think the media misses lots of great stories when it's focused on smaller issues. And number 7, ignore the role that religion plays in other important aspects of modern life. Religion's almost every part of life. Recently, we had a conference of religious leaders and religious reporters from Latin America at BYU. And one of the panelists who came got a copy of the New York Times that day, and he gave an example of how almost every story on the front page could have a religious angle to it if the religion reporters would understand that. So I think we opened up some doors from some Latin American reporters to report about all faiths, not just my faith or another faith fairly. So I'm going to end it there, but I hope that was a decent response, and I really enjoyed joining this group.
It certainly was. Thank you so much, Professor Campbell. Yeah, and both you and Dr. Ward have firsthand experience, and so you both are so qualified to speak on this topic. So thank you to both of you for being here today. I also wanted to acknowledge Mr. Mark Romney is on the call today on the webinar. He's the Dallas State President of the Latter-day Saints. So thank you, Mr. Romney, for joining us today as well. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Both excellent presentations, very thorough and in-depth. Perhaps if each of you could give a concluding remark, and if I can just perhaps throw a little question in there, and if you can address that in your concluding statement. And it basically is what efforts can we do to help expose the truth or to rationalize this? In other words, it seems like the bad guys seem to be so well organized all the time and united and are marching forward, but the righteous somehow we're not totally united. What can we do to expose the media and lead and guide people to a responsible media? Dr. Ward, could you go first?
Yes, well, first of all, I want to thank Professor Campbell for your very fine presentation. And I didn't realize about the development of 2018, but I've always felt a little uncomfortable using the M word. That's why I tried to use more LDS, but I think you ought to insist more with the media that they respect and use the name that you want to be referred to as. That's not right. The way that the media just decides, oh yeah, no, we're just going to use this is the name. They don't do that with other groups. So why are they doing it with the Latter-day Saints? It's not fair, you know. And the same for us. I mean, I think we have to really emphasize that the need to do that. Secondly, concerning your question, Ray, I mean, I think part of it, this is an experience that I've had many times with media. This is just a process, and maybe part of it is even for self-edification, if you will. But when I had a certain period of my life where when adverse articles appeared regarding our church, I liked to go to visit the newspapers where those articles were written. And I went to many, including the New York Times and to ABC, NBC, CBS, all of them. I've had a chance to sit down with those people. And I always did the same thing. I asked to meet with the reporter and with the reporter's editor and myself, because I never went there with any kind of adversity. All I did was I sat down in front of them with the story, and then I went through step by step the things that had been improperly reported, and I showed what was actually true. And my purpose in doing that was twofold. On the one hand, because I felt that it had to be represented properly. And also, I wanted the person that wrote the article to have his or her boss there, so that the boss would recognize this person needs to do a better job. You know, so that was another aspect of this. And I had many remarkable experiences doing that, including with the New York Times. There's not time to share about that today, but I had wonderful experiences doing that. And the third thing is, I really agree with you, Professor Campbell, about we need to have an interfaith partnership in dealing with these issues. When one of us is struck, all of us are struck, in fact, you know. And I always remember Ambassador Philip Sanchez, whom I had the privilege to work with for many years. He was a former U.S. ambassador to Honduras and to Colombia, and he was involved for many years with an organization that we had that was called the American Leadership Conference. And actually, we worked closely on numerous occasions, Professor Campbell, with Cleon Skousen. I don't know if you know Dr. Skousen, but I had a chance to establish a wonderful relationship with him, even stayed in his home a few times, just an incredible human being, you know. But anyways, Ambassador Sanchez, we have in our church, we have a ceremony called the blessing, where a couple can be able to be blessed in marriage, and we believe that helps to strengthen their marriage, you know. And I know marriage is very important, likewise, within the Church of Latter-day Saints. So anyway, we had this ceremony, and I approached Ambassador Sanchez, and I asked him if he wanted to participate in our blessing, and he said, "Of course I do. I need all the blessings I can get." So I think that's the point, is we all can benefit from each other and have trust that God can and is working through all of our faiths. So anyway, that's my appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Warren.
I just echo what you just said there. I think I agree 100% with all you've said. I think that the two things that I've learned as both a journalist and as someone who's involved with our interfaith work, I'm a member of the Salt Lake Interfaith Roundtable, and have, as I've been able to take my students around to many different faiths. We were just at the Mennonite church here recently, went to the Catholic Mass. We've done lots of things to do that. And as we talk to our Hindu brothers and sisters, or to our Muslim brothers and sisters, it becomes a deep respect. We don't agree on everything, obviously. We don't agree on some doctrines, but we can agree on the things that matter in our lives, in our families, and in our faiths, and how we can support each other. So I guess as an education, exposing ourselves to those ideas, interfaith way, I think a lot of journalists need to do that to help them improve their reporting. And then second of all, as this won't surprise you as an educator, I think we need some training. Like I said, we initiated the first ever Latin American religion journalist training program during the winter at BYU. We had about 25 journalists from around Latin America here. We had leaders from Catholic faith and from the Latter-day Saints and from other faiths and a bunch of religion reporters. And we just had some great discussions. And I really felt like we made some headway. So as an interfaith group, perhaps there's some way to do some training where we can work with religion reporters and other reporters for that matter to help improve their, so I know it's a long road, but I think it's something that is worth doing. We may not make it get everyone trained, but can we approach that? So those are two ideas: interfaith work and training, trying to get more journalists trained in this area.
All right, gentlemen, again, thank you both for your presentations and your suggestions for us to move forward. And thank you to all the participants for joining us today. And we do a webinar at UPF every Tuesday afternoon at 2 p.m. And you can find all the information at our website, us.upf.org. So thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Professor Campbell, God bless you.